Right. Hello, everyone. Good to see we've got 139 people on the call so far, but there's a few more to come. So I'm just going to give it a moment to be sure that we get everybody in. And Carolyn can let me know when we're confident we've got everybody.
You're good to go, Brian. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Carolyn. Well, yeah, hello, everyone. We've had a tremendous response to this webinar on Nuact. I think there's 220 registered to attend and others wanting to watch it afterwards. So that's fantastic to have that level of interest. And the way we're going to run this session is, my name is Brian Walker. I'm Pro Vice Chancellor for Research, Strategy and Resources, and I also chair the Nuact board. And I'm going to make some introductory remarks about why we are doing Nuact and what it's for. And then Libby Gibson, who's director of Nuact, will take us through a bit more of the shaping of the program. And Susie Renison, who's Nuact manager, will introduce us some of the processes that we're going to use moving forward with Nuact. Rebecca Weaver is with us as Research Strategy Administrator, who runs and administers the Nuact program. And I'm really pleased that we've got three of our Nuact fellows, Sylvia, Sean, and Greg, are with us to help with Q&A. So if you've got questions about how people have experienced Nuact, they're the ones to address those questions. Next slide, please. For the purposes of the discussion, we're keen to have, we think it's best to have an anonymized discussion, and actually the chat function in Zoom doesn't always work as well because following it's more difficult. So we're using Slido. So if in parallel, either on your browser or indeed on an alternative device on your mobile, if you want to use the QR code or just go to slido.com, put in that event code and you'll get onto our discussion chat board and you can lodge your Q&As, which are anonymous. We'll answer as many as we can today. If there are themes that come up, we'll try and produce some answers or FAQs later. This is anonymous, and so we won't be able to reply to you on any individual questions, and we wouldn't really want to be dealing with personal specific issues. If you'd like to contact us separately about those afterwards, of course, you're more than welcome to do that. In fact, we'd encourage you to do that. Next slide. So if you just click through this slide, Susie, this is just to remind me to say, I think, that I always want to start talks about research at Newcastle by celebrating how good we are at it. And to remind folk that across our 5 thematic strengths that we talk about, we've got an enormous amount of research activity, more than 3,000 researchers. We spend more than £200 million a year on research. We have some particularly distinctive ways of going about our research in innovation centres, in our global challenge hubs, in our campuses abroad and so on, and it's very productive. And we can celebrate a number of markers of success, and I won't necessarily pick out any of these. And also, I think what's particularly distinctive about our research is how it's high in its impact, and that's partly why we lead global rankings, such as the impact rankings. And it's high in its partnerships. As an anchor institution, we work a lot closely with partnerships in our region in particular. Next slide. But in 2018, nonetheless, despite obvious success and productivity, in 2018, we took a long, hard look at our research and thought about how we should best frame our research in a way that would play to the UK context that we find ourselves in. And indeed, our thinking about the UK context in 2017-18 has, I think, was reasonably prescient in that a lot of these features have become more and more emphasized with time. The need for multidisciplinary research that is challenge-led, that is at large scale, that is place-based and internationally linked. All of these have become very prominent themes in discussion, even in yesterday's Levelling Up white paper, for example. So we've got to line up, as we do great stuff in discovery and we hook it up with its end users for its impact and we train more people to do more in future, we've got to think about lining up our attributes with that UK context. And in particular, there's an attribute that we have, which we've called on the slide there, diversity and cohesion, by which I mean that we are big enough to have all the disciplines, but we're small enough to combine them. So next click, Susie. So thinking about that, we set about putting together a research strategy skeleton, if you like, a structure in which at the center of everything we do, we're identifying what we're really good at and what we can be good at and being future facing. And then around that, we're lining up our infrastructural resources, campuses, joint activities with partners. We're lining up our capacity building, which is where the Nuact investment comes in. And we're lining up our partnerships to work together with in order to be responding to challenges. So conceptually, that's how we thought about it in 2018. Next click. And since then, what we've been able to do is put a lot more flesh on the bones of that skeleton. And in particular, we're now in a position, having reviewed our portfolio of research and done a lot of bottom-up work in the community, we know what our 5 thematic strengths are at the center of this donut diagram, but we also know now that we've got 16 new university centers of research excellence, or new cores, and in addition, around the penumbra there, we've got a number of other major research entities and activities and themes going on. So we've got a much clearer view of our portfolio now than I think we had. And that now is allowing us to shape some of the investments that we make, including beginning to shape the Nuact portfolio. Next click. So ultimately, for the purposes of knowing how we're getting on in research, we measure things. We're measuring our capacity, our research power, the number of researchers, which we want to see increase. We're measuring our resources, including our income, which is the middle panel, which we want to see increase. And we're measuring how effectively we're producing a thriving research environment, and that's the research culture piece, which, as many of you will know, we've just initiated a roadmap. So we're looking now at how those metrics will increase with time. And we see Nuact as being absolutely central to that. Nuact isn't alone, though, in our ambition to grow research. We're also just about to launch a new futures program, which is devised for people who are at the more senior stages, senior lecturer and above, of their academic careers, to have people recruited in opportunity areas at that level. But Nuact was designed to fill what we felt was a gap in that our pipeline of people coming through at career development fellowship level and feeding on to growing our research numbers was lower than our comparators back in 2017-18. And so Nuact was intended to help people to make that transition to independence and to swell our numbers and our capacity and our community in people who are making that transition to independence and going to be the future of our academic community here at Newcastle. So that's where we started from. And I think I'll hand over to Libby now, who can explain where we've got to and what's next.
Thank you, Brian. So on the next slide, we've got a snapshot of where we are at the moment. So you can see that sort of halfway through the process, we're about halfway through recruitment, and the majority of our fellows have been recruited through 2 open calls, and these focused on multidisciplinary research. These fellows sit in academic units within the faculties, but many bridge more than one school, institute, or even faculty. And then a few more have been recruited through the targeted calls, and either through Nuact, where they're co-funded with external stakeholders, or they're aligned to strategic grants with our partners. So on the next slide, you'll see what we're planning for 2022. So this year we continue to recruit Nuact fellows through a number of targeted calls that are under development, but the majority will be through a new stream of Nuact fellowships. So we're launching a new series of calls in our 5 thematic areas and a clinical track. And these thematic areas are aligned to the areas of research strength at Newcastle University. So each of these themes have opportunity areas within them, which are aligned to each faculty in the university. And the opportunity areas have been developed in consultation at faculty boards with input from new cores and the academic units. And these opportunity areas have been clustered into our research themes that are fortunately mapped onto those themes that Brian showed you earlier on. So these calls are going to be staggered throughout the year, as you can see in this timeline, and the exact dates will be put on the website very soon. So you can see that we're going to start off with these 2 data and digital and citizen place theme. And on the next slide, we'll show an example of what that theme will look like. So here, our first call, we're going to launch at the end of the month. And these are the examples of the first 2 multidisciplinary themes that will open. And underneath each of these themes are the opportunity areas that are priorities for appointment. Within these, there are examples which fall under schools, institutes across FMS, HAS and SAGE, and these will be provided in the call documents. So we're looking for strong research proposals that align with these areas. And then the following themes will be released later on in the year. So on the next slide, we're going to show you what we're looking for. So we are seeking to build a diverse cohort that will be future research leaders at Newcastle and who will reflect our values. So I think, Susie, you can just go through because I'm going to go completely in the wrong order. So when we're during the recruitment process, we answer these questions. So is the proposed research project innovative, feasible and distinctive? Does the candidate have the potential to establish and maintain a world-leading research profile in their field and become a rounded academic? And does the candidate show potential to initiate collaborations, to lead and inspire others, and to contribute positively to Newcastle's workplace culture and principles around EDI? So Susie's going to talk you through the process, but what I wanted to really emphasize is that at all stages, it's important that you make this narrative really clear. So you're going to be asked for a lay summary for a non-expert reader that will help us to prioritize and long list the applications that we get in. Your application needs to highlight your trajectory towards research leadership and independence, and explain how your research is distinctive and important, as well as aligning with those opportunity areas that I showed you on the previous slide. So when you're developing this research project, think about these questions. Why you? Why this? Why here? Why now? Who are you going to work with? How are you going to fund your research beyond the startup that we're going to give you? And how will your research be reflected in your teaching later on, and education of the next track of future researchers in your discipline? So as we show here, we're looking for rounded academics. So that also includes citizenship and your wider contribution to the university. So where will you fit at Newcastle? And we also really welcome applications for underrepresented groups. It's really important that we ensure that the staff of our future is representative of society. And so throughout the process, we're monitoring statistics at all stages, making sure that there's no attrition throughout the process, that we keep our representation. Our panelists are giving EDI and unconscious bias training to make sure that we can evaluate everything in a fair and transparent way. We also ask questions on EDI and research culture at all stages of the application process, because our fellows are ambassadors and they reflect our values as future research leaders. So the next thing, as an applicant, please contact someone in the schools that you're interested in being hosted in. Talk to the people that you're interested in working with. The heads of schools, directors of research and the theme leads in your discipline area will be able to give you a wider overview of research, as well as support you and guide you with your applications. And also, I'm reaching out to those academic colleagues on the call. Please do contact people that I've identified that would be really great Nuact fellows, and do guide them through the process. On the next slide, I'm going to show how we support our fellows. So a fellowship is a really rare opportunity to dedicate time to a research program that you're really passionate about. It enables you to build your team and your network before you transition onto an open-ended teaching and research contract and all that conflicting work that brings. It's also a substantial university investment. So we are here as the Nuact team to support our fellows and ensure that they thrive. And the cohort itself provides huge opportunities for peer support and learning. And you're going to see some of our fellows shortly to answer questions. And then on the next slide, we'll show you some of the formal support in terms of mentoring, working with organisational development to tailor your training, and also working with research funding development team to identify funding opportunities and strengthen your proposals. Now, the proposal for the PhD student that we're going to fund for you is really important. So remember to consider this in your application. During the fellowship programme over the 5 years, there are periodic reviews in addition to the standard PDR processes for any member of staff. Now, I want to emphasise that these are light touch, and we normally really enjoy and value these conversations and finding ways that we can support our fellows to achieve their ambitions. And the expectation is that we will retain our fellows and they will have a long and successful career at Newcastle University. And now Susie's going to take you through the process.
Hi, I'm Susie Renison, and together with Rebecca Weaver and the recruitment team, we manage the Nuact application and recruitment process for the sort of open calls as well as the individual targeted recruitment for Nuact and Nupact. So I just wanted to take you briefly through the process for this call. You'll actually make your application on the Newcastle recruitment portal as standard. We are hoping to have each round open for around 6 weeks. And this first round, so that's Cities in Place and Data and Digital, we're anticipating opening at the end of this month, and that will close at the beginning of April. So the first stage is that Rebecca and I will manually go through and check all the applications that are received to check that they all meet the requirements, which we'll talk about a bit more in a moment. The first stage is the long listing stage. So at this stage, the panel only see the cover summary sheets, which means it's really important to get those sort of as good as you can. The panel will review those sheets, they will score them, and then they come together to discuss. And the applications with the most merit will go forward to shortlisting, where those full applications will then be reviewed. Again, they'll be reviewed, scored, and the shortlisting panel will come together to talk through those applications with subject specialists attending to introduce each of those applications. All of our panelists are EDI trained, they've all got unconscious bias training as well. So, we make sure that, the process is as fair as it can be. And then we move on to those, onto the interviews and visits. We're hoping that this year we'll be able to offer in-person interviews, but it might be that that's a bit of a hybrid. In terms of feedback, because of the number of applications that we are expecting to get based on what we've previously had, we're only able to offer written feedback for applicants who reach the shortlisting stage or beyond. So all of this information about the required documents is all going to be in the candidate pack, and the candidate pack is going to be linked to from the job advert, and it will also be linked to from the Nuact website. So if there's any kind of detail that you don't catch now, don't worry at all. Obviously, it's all going to be available there. What we're expecting to see from you is a one-page covering letter. And that one page should detail your motivation for applying and detail how the fellowship will further your research and your career aspirations, as well as drive forward research at Newcastle. And we're also asking candidates to identify a host academic unit in that document as well. Your CV should be 4 pages maximum. We would expect to see the usual things on there, such as your training, your qualifications, your employment history, research outputs. But we're also interested in your wider contributions. So any teaching, outreach, any work to promote EDI or research culture, that should go on there as well. And then the summary cover sheet. So this should be 2 pages maximum. You'll be able to download a template for this and full guidance from the Nuact website, which absolutely sort of talks you through all of those different questions. The first thing to say is we ask you do not include your name or your current institution on that document. These are deliberately anonymised to encourage equality of opportunity in the process. The sheet asks a number of questions. So it asks you the title and the topic of your research. And as Libby has also already mentioned, it's an opportunity to provide a lay summary of your research, which is really important because these panels are cross-disciplinary. So it gives everybody an opportunity to really understand your work. There's also an opportunity to talk about your fit to Newcastle, and as well as your commitment to EDI and to research culture. There's also a section on here for career breaks. So that could be anything from a period of part-time working, it could be caring responsibilities, parental leave, any long-term sickness, it could be time spent in industry. If there's anything like that that you would like us to know about, please do pop it on the sheet there. We actively encourage applications from researchers who have had career breaks, but we just need to make sure that that's taken into account when we're looking at your overall track record. And then your full research proposal, which should be 3 pages maximum, and that's including any graphics. So that should include details of your research programme, any potential benefits to Newcastle, fit with your nominated unit, your approach to engagement and funding, and also details about how you would deploy your PhD student. Now, it's pretty obvious on the recruitment system where you should put your cover letter and CV. There's a nice little link that says attach your CV here, attach your cover letter here. But the summary cover sheet and the full research proposal should be added as additional documents on the system. Further requirements, we ask that you don't use any less than 11-point font in your application to save our panelists' eyes and also make the amount of text fair for people. You mustn't exceed the maximum page or character count limits, and all documentation must be complete. If those requirements are not followed, the application won't be put forward to the panel. So it's really important that that is done. If you have any questions about the process, please do come to us. And equally, if you require any adjustments in the application process, please do get in contact with us as soon as possible, and we'll do everything that we can to help you. And just a note on there for clinicians. So we are hoping to run our call for clinicians in autumn, and that will be a slightly different process. There will be an expression of interest form to be completed prior to the full application, but further details will be on our website in the next few weeks. So this is us, this is with the Nuact team. This is Libby, me and Rebecca, and you can reach all three of us on the email address there. That's nuact.admin@newcastle.ac.uk. The website is going to be overhauled in the next few weeks and have all this sort of information on there, so do check back. We're also going to be putting any FAQs that we get throughout the process onto that website. So there's a good chance that if you have a question, it might have already been answered, so do check there as well. That's me. We're very lucky to be joined by three of our lovely Nuact fellows. Sylvia Deldin, who's a fellow with the Translational and Clinical Research Institute in FMS, Sean Malloy, who's with the Newcastle Law School, and Greg Much, who's a Nuact fellow and also Royal Academy of Engineering Research fellow. And we've asked them just to talk a little bit, to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their Nuact experiences so far. So if we start with Sylvia.
Hello, hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Susie, Lily, and also Brian for the introduction. So I'm Sylvia. I'm a bioengineer as a background. I sit in the Faculty of Medical Science and specifically in the Translational and Clinical Research Institute. My research is really around digital health, digital technology, applied to a variety of clinical applications for translational research. My main aim is understanding a little bit more about mobility and problems and issues that people with neurodegenerative diseases might have in their everyday life, trying to really enhance remote monitoring and also remote clinical management. I am fairly new to Nuact in the sense that I've started in July. Nuact family, I would call it. It's a really supportive environment. I love the diversity and the inclusivity that Nuact really has provided to all the fellows. I think it's a great opportunity to actually see the diversity of research going on in Newcastle, having a little bit of lateral thinking and the opportunity to talk to the other fellows and maybe just have new ideas of collaboration. We have had a couple of social events, you know, as their rules let us to do that. And it was great to really meet all the other fellows and to really understand the variety of research going on here. I think also it's a fantastic supportive environment. Obviously, it provides you with funding, it provides you with a PhD student, and it provides you with a lot of support, mentoring, a lot of training for PI to really build that independent career pathway, to really let you think about where you want to go and what you want to really become. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity. Newcastle is a great place where to work, as you know, and live as well. So I would be happy also to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks very much, Sylvia. Sean, can we go to you next, please?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So my name is Sean Malloy. I'm based at the law school within the Haas faculty. Just a quick bit of background about myself. Then I originally worked at Edinburgh. I worked on a large research project focusing on peace agreements. And then I came to Newcastle and worked here as a research fellow for a while before moving to Northumbria as a law school. And then I've taken up this position like Sylvia relatively recently. And like Sylvia, it has given me the opportunity to sort of go back to this area of peace agreements. And I'm looking specifically at the relationship between peace agreements and children. And so Nuact really has given me the opportunity to engage in this research. In reality, I thought that opportunity had passed as most people would sort of move into their lectureship, and for the first few years at least, it's really focused on the teaching. This has given me the opportunity to come back and sort of engage with this. Like Sylvia, I would echo many of the benefits. It really is an excellent environment, very collaborative and very supportive. As Sylvia said, we get to see the research that other people are conducting and to think laterally. And in terms of the level of support that you're offered both within the law school faculty and the wider Nuact team, it really is fantastic. And it helps us think about not just our own research project, but also developing ourselves as rounded academics. So training in terms of leadership, you have the support of a supervisor and mentor. And yeah, really a fantastic opportunity. I would encourage everyone to apply. And like Sylvia, looking forward to answering any questions you might have. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Sean. Greg, can we go to you too?
Yeah, absolutely. So good afternoon, everyone. Perhaps I'm an older Nuact. I started in September 2019, so I've been here a little bit longer. I'm just over 2 years now, so maybe I can say a little bit more about my journey over the last couple of years. I joined Newcastle in the chemical engineering department in 2016, so I was already here before I became a Nuact. I'm a chemist and a chemical engineer by background. My interests are carbon capture, specifically direct air capture. About 9 months after starting my Nuact fellowship, I secured a Royal Academy of Engineering Research Fellowship, which was one of the first in Newcastle for quite a while, and they positively mentioned Nuact numerous times throughout the application and the interview process as the sort of, sector leading institutional support that they want to see for the people that they fund. In the last 2 years, I've secured my first EPSRC grant as a PI. And then literally 2 days ago, I started a very large program grant, an EPSRC program grant as a work package lead. So if I look back across the last 2.5 years, I've gone from working independently as a solo researcher to somebody that's now leading a group of 4 PhD students and 2 or 3 research associates at any given time. So, and that doesn't mention all the work that I've been doing with government departments, outreach, running art exhibitions, all these different opportunities that sort of come to you when you're given this platform. So I echo everything that's been said already. It's not a stretch to say that it has definitely transformed the trajectory of my career. And likewise, I'm very happy to take any questions that anybody has.
Thanks very much, Greg. Right, I'm going to stop sharing this before we go to the Q&A.
Thanks very much. So I think it's probably over to me to try to chair and help us through the questions. I think we're going to probably pin ourselves as the panel to the screen for you. And there's a lot on Slido already, and I might kick off with a few. There's sort of clusters around eligibility. There's some questions about process and timings and so on. There's some questions, I think, about where the scheme is going. Actually, will this still be here next year? I suppose one of the key, if it's too early now. So I could kick off on where the scheme is going, and then maybe hand to Libby for some of those eligibility questions. We said in 2018 that we would commit to 100 posts over 5 years, and we've only appointed 47. So we still have a lot of room for maneuver. Moreover, as Greg has highlighted, quite a number of our fellows have gained external fellowships, and quite a number of our fellowships have been jointly funded, sometimes through those new pact arrangements, which are with, for example, commercial partners or government partners who want to make an appointment with us proactively. And sometimes they've been jointly funded by big awards like Global Challenges Research Fund, hubs, or whatever. So what that means is that the budget actually will cover rather more than 100. So I'm not worried right now about us hitting a limit on numbers, and we're not going to have to be too proactive in managing numbers with each round, etc. So I don't think any of you should go away feeling worried that, oh, we're going to run out of appointment opportunities and that it's not worth applying. So perhaps that's helpful for you. And there will, I don't anticipate that we'll use up all our slots in 2022. So I do anticipate that there will be future calls. I think it's fair to say that we will, as I've tried to get across, we're increasingly looking to reinforce areas of strength at Newcastle. And we want to see that alignment of Nuact with other groupings so that you can benefit from what's around you best. And we don't want to appoint people to posts where they won't thrive. This is all about putting you in a position where you can succeed and give you the freedom and opportunity to succeed. So that's what it's about. I don't know if Libby, I might pass to you on some of those eligibility questions.
Yeah. If you one in particular that you want to start, or
Well, so we've got some on whether external candidates can apply, or whether this
yes,
is all
external candidates can definitely apply. This webinar is just for internal candidates. We will be posting the information on the website later. As we said, a lot of this conversation will be recorded and clustered into FAQs, and we are always keen to have conversations. And please do reach out to potential applicants externally and support them through the process. Please do that. Yes.
We've been asked if somebody who perhaps currently holds a different academic position or who holds a current fellowship can apply. And the answer is yes.
Yes, we have many of our Nuacts hold, as you can see from Greg, hold other fellowships. So sometimes they come in and they already are on a fellowship and they complete that fellowship while starting Nuact, or like they may then apply for fellowships, and we have lots of different examples of those where people go and have an external fellowship as well. Both are encouraged, but we have a whole variety of different ways that people come into this scheme.
And there was a question in there about whether you can continue to affiliate yourself with an existing funding that's ongoing. And of course you can. Of course, we wouldn't want you to sever your existing momentum or.
No, and we meet the requirements from your funder as well. So that's.
There's a question about reapplication, which I think the answer is yes, you're welcome to reapply. We certainly wouldn't want to exclude people. And somebody asked about the numbers, and it is worth sharing with you all that we had 700-ish applications in both of the first two open calls, and that's both good news and bad news. And the bad news is that we worry by having an entirely open call at that scale that it's hard to make fair evaluations and really good judgments about people at that scale, and that we're putting an awful lot of people to an awful lot of work in preparing those applications. So in order to make this, a more considered process, that's one of the reasons that we want to focus this a bit more on opportunity areas that we think could see reinforcing our capacity at Newcastle. It's partly because we don't want to have an imbalance between the number of folk who are applying and the likelihood of their being appointed. That just isn't an efficient way to go about things. I think somebody said, if I could apply to multiple opportunity areas this year, which should I wait for the one that suits me best, or could I go for multiple ones? That's a good question.
I think you don't want to force yourself into a space that doesn't fit. Make your application as strong as it possibly can be. And that might mean focusing on one particular area, but we don't stop you from applying to multiple areas. But please don't try and shape your research just to fit an area because it comes up first. As Brian says, there's no reason to think that we're going to favour applicants at the earlier stages and run out later on. That's not going to happen. And we don't have a quota for each of those opportunity areas. We really do just select the best applicants. Susie's got an answer as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because there's sort of a few questions about it. What we're going to do is release all of those opportunity areas, the details of those on the website in the next couple of weeks. So you'll be able to look through those and really make a decision about where your research best fits, without having to worry about whether you should fit it into something if your area doesn't come up later.
Yeah, that's helpful, Susie. And there are a few questions about process actually in relation to timing. So I think you've just answered that. There's a question about lead-in time, and it actually might be interesting to hear from Greg, Sylvia and Sean about how they handled this in terms of, basically once we have finished the appointment process, we're open to any kind of lead-in time to take up the post. I don't know if any of you had an experience of arranging that to fit you best, to make the most of the opportunity. Does anybody want to comment on that? Don't know what your experience was, Sean.
Well, as I said, I was lecturing at Northumbria when I got the post, and of course then I had a number of responsibilities that I wanted to carry through, a project which I was involved in, but then also in terms of finishing the teaching for the students and getting to mark and things like that. And Nuact was really very accommodating, sort of worked around my schedule and when suited me best. So again, it was fantastic. Always taking on board my concerns. My initial worry was that I'd have to take up the post as soon as I sort of got it. and wouldn't have fulfilled my other responsibilities, but that certainly wasn't my experience.
Again, I think our philosophy is to make it work most effectively for your success. And we've had people who have been moving, including internationally, who've done a transition of, a gradual transition into Nuact fellowships, which I think is an important thing. So it's entirely flexible. I don't think this is something that we're going to angst about at the time of application, Livy. We'll worry about that later. It's not something that I think you need to be anxious about as candidates if you are. What else have we got? Sarah, I may have not been just watching the screen as avidly in the last few minutes. What is coming up?
You've pulled out quite a lot of the main themes there. There's a question around career stage and who exactly is this for? That might differ across disciplines, but that's a fair question. There's also a question around part-time candidature as well. Can you do this on a part-time shared basis?
Yeah, we do have examples of part-time working. The scheme is fully flexible. So the 5-year period is based on full-time, but then we will tailor it to that full-time equivalent for your working pattern. And if you want to change that pattern throughout the fellowship, then we'll work with you, of course. I mean, many of our fellows have different commitments that come up, and we make the scheme work for them. I think Greg has something to answer as well.
Yeah, just the question Susie raised there that I thought was quite important about the one about what career stage is it for, etc. I guess to potentially allay fears for people that the question literally says too early in my career to be a credible candidate. When I started writing my application, I was between 2.5 years after I completed my PhD. And when I started, I was around the 3-year post-PhD mark. So that probably gives you an idea that I'd had a period of time being independent, published some papers, etc., etc. But I certainly felt very early in my career. Maybe that allays those fears a little bit.
There's a question in there actually about more mature candidates as well, at the other end of the spectrum, Greg. And I think it's in relation to clinical candidates. So clinicians, I don't know how many clinicians that might be on the call just now. Clinicians obviously have a particular circumstance in having to negotiate their clinical duties with the NHS partner side by side with their research ambition. The answer to the maturity question is that this is about transition to independence. And that might happen at any age. That's not the point. But it's more the point of career stage and progress. And for example, we've had examples, and I can think this also applies in, for example, schemes like the Future Leaders Fellowships, people who are discipline hopping and argue that they're making a transition to independence in a new discipline. So whatever the argument is, it's an argument about you being a candidate who would benefit most from the opportunity that Nuact would give you to make that transition to independence in that field. And it's not, age is not a factor in that. Sylvia, you want to come in? I'll come back to clinicians, I think is a specific topic that I'll come back to if we want to, but I'll separate that.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, I totally agree. And I, different from Greg, was actually, I would say, quite few years into my postdoc career. So I was around like 9 to 10 years into that. So for me, it was maybe like the same question. So how can I now, am I ready to build my own independence? And so I think there is a lot of flexibility and a lot of examples just within like, this small group of me, Greg, and Sean to show that. And for me, it was very, very important to actually think about where do I want to go? And for the internal candidate, I would say it's really important for you to think about what is your USP, why you, for example, and not the, I don't know, your line manager or the big professor you're working with. And it really, really is a fantastic opportunity to build that. And I think it's great.
Sarah, do you want to give us any other prompts?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this has been touched upon, perhaps it has, but I think it's a good question around the information currently states the fit of existing research at Newcastle. What potential is there for Nuact to support research in new areas?
So fit is a subjective term, isn't it? What does that mean? Others might want to comment on this, and maybe actually it's maybe a good question for fellows as to how you perceived your fit and what you needed around you to succeed, or actually whether you'd be perfectly happy doing it all on your own. That's very discipline specific, that kind of thinking. I think, Greg, what are your thoughts?
I totally agree with the last point you made about being discipline specific. So if I take chemical engineering, for example, there's only 3 research groups and they're all very large. So you can make the claim of, oh, well, how am I being independent if I'm working within a research group? But that's very discipline specific, right? There's 3 very large research groups in my discipline. I think you have to justify the fit based on, certainly in my discipline anyway, you have to base the fit around the expertise that's here, the equipment that's available, the people that you'll collaborate with, but the specific research problem that you work on could be quite distinct. And in my case, that's exactly what it was. I wanted to work with a group that were world leading in chemical separations generally, but I wanted to work on a distinctive area, which was direct air capture, which is a future challenge that you see in the news. And I had some, I thought anyway, good ideas around how to pursue it. So I think you have to think carefully about what fit means and how you sort of complement and fit within what's already here.
Yeah, I agree with that, Greg. And I think also let's be clear what independence is. Independence is not being solo isolated. Independence is being someone who's shaping your own research trajectory, who's following a visibly leading mission. But you're probably doing it in most disciplines, you're doing it collectively as part of things around you where you would each share different elements and there are overlaps, and that's perfectly okay. I've spent all my career working in a steroid hormone lab where we were all overlapping in our interests in a certain pathway of steroid signaling, but we each brought our distinctive elements to bear on that. And we were each independent in that sense and collaborating in another sense. And that's why it was a thriving environment. And these are the sorts of environments that we want to encourage. For others, it's more distinctive than that. I mean, Sean, I'd be interested in your thoughts on, obviously operating in a discipline which is more typically is not, this isn't called team science, but what are your thoughts about that, what you need around you?
Yeah, I mean, I think how I very much approached this initially, my proposal was thinking about how the Nuact scheme would benefit me, and that was certainly came through in my initial drafts. But I do also think that it's important to approach it from the other perspective, is really what can you bring to the university? And how I was able to start answering that question, I think, was really to understand what is happening at the university as a whole. And in terms of my specific area, which is broadly around children and children's rights, I mean, there's plenty happening in the law school and some leading thinkers there, but there's also work over at GPS, which looks at the same thing, children in conflict. And then there are these new cores which are developing, specifically the new core on children. So then I was able to sort of feed my research into how it would contribute to these different things that were happening in the university. And I think that's something that I would really like to impress upon people is, yes, this is how about benefiting us as individual researchers and developing as holistic academics, but also there has to be, well, what can we bring to the university? And I think that's really about understanding what's happening throughout the university in the broad area that you're working in.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. It's really helpful and interesting. I think one of the other interesting questions that we might experience now after our COVID world and living online, and previous to this meeting would have been in the Armstrong reception rooms, and we wouldn't have a space for 220 of us, and nor would people be able to join us from afar. So what does that mean for how you might work independently but together? And there might be propositions of people who want to be, networked outside Newcastle, but argue that basing it in Newcastle is the right thing to do. I think that's the world is more porous in those terms of how you might connect. And if you're a physical scientist, you might want particular kit, but it may or may not be here in town. It might be something you want to use at a distance from time to time. So I think there are different constructs of fit these days. It's be imaginative. What else should we cover?
There's an important one around COVID impacts.
Yes.
Do you want me to read that one out? So will applicants be able to tell the panel about adverse impacts to research between 2020 to 2022 from the pandemic, and how will these be taken into consideration?
Yeah, so there is a box on the application form. Susie can come in as well if you want. So we like you to inform us of anything that may have disrupted your work, or where you may have come in through a less traditional track. So one of the boxes on the form that you'll fill in gives you space to do that. Now, we consider all sorts of things. Like even before COVID, we were discussing how the impacts of career breaks or a non-traditional route might have changed, for example, the volume of outputs or compared to others at the career stage. So it's important at this point to say that we evaluate the applications according to the career stage of the applicants. So those that have been had a longer time to develop their track record are evaluated according to that time and the expectations that we would have compared to somebody that's earlier on in the process. And so likewise, we take into account other routes and other career breaks. And obviously, many people have been impacted by COVID in lots of different ways. So in this last open round, we provided extra space for people to tell us how they've been impacted by COVID, and that was taken into account. And also through the evaluation and the work that we're doing with progress and progression with our fellows, there's space to do that as well. So we consider that at all stages. Susie, have you got a more articulate way of explaining that?
No, I think that's covered it.
Okay.
There's a really interesting question just come in about asking fellows how you distribute your time. It might also talk to your planning for the end of a Nuact period when you're being research intensive deliberately, and what you're planning for in emerging from that as a credible member of the teaching and research faculty, and how you might be managing your academic development more broadly alongside the Nuact Fellowship. I don't know if any of you want to speak to that.
Well, maybe I can say something about this. So I think that's a very good question. So I think that one thing to keep in mind is that obviously, for example, for internal candidates, they might be working already on some projects. So, and again, Nuact and sort of the infrastructure gives you the flexibility also to talk about this and decide what's the best way also for you to, if you want to spread your time. So you might be, I don't know, working still one day on a specific project and then leave the rest of the week for obviously focusing on your Nuact Fellowship and your future. In terms of also teaching, I would say, at least from my experience, I think that being able to supervise or co-supervise PhD students and students throughout the year, it's a very good, I would say, experience, and also can account to demonstrate how you have teaching also experience for that. So there is a possibility, for example, to get some teaching qualification also within the 5 years of Nuact Fellowship, also based on student supervision only. And so I think it's really important just to think about how you would then input and provide sort of and ensure that maybe you have also done something with teaching and also supporting that within the university. So I don't know if that's.
Thanks, Sylvia. Yeah, that's helpful. Any other comments from fellows about distribution of time and effort? And
yeah, I'm happy to add to that. I think my case is perhaps slightly different because the Royal Academy of Engineering stipulates certain amounts of time that can be spent on different activities, but they also recognise, as I think you were hinting at, Brian, that you can't be 100% research and at the end of the 5 years suddenly take up a teaching load that you have no experience of, right? So I think I've just been jotting it down and trying to think about it. You know, it's not exact, but I would say my teaching is around probably 10%. And by teaching, I mean undergraduate teaching. There's probably another 10% of my time is spent on things like working with Nucor, working with Bays, doing outreach. And then I do genuinely think that probably around 75 to 80% of my time is spent on research. But that could be anything from working hand in hand in the lab with a PhD student to getting on the train and going to a university to speak to somebody that I think is interesting to work with. So maybe you want to split that 80% in half and say 40% of my time is spent on thinking about the future and building a group, and 40% of the time is spent on executing what I'm doing right now. It does change, and it will change. I mean, last year I had a small teaching load. This year it's slightly larger. I'm also I'm shadowing a sort of core discipline module so that I'm ready to take that on in later years. I'm also starting to do more of the NEPS training, having done some of it previously. So you can see, I guess what I'm saying really is it is majority research, but it's maybe not exactly what you would think. It's not working all the time at a bench. And the teaching load will sort of gradually increase, but it is noticeably lower than my colleagues, which can cause friction, I think, as well. You have to be honest about that it is an enviable position that I find myself in, to have this time to build a research group, a team, and funding, etc. So that would be my sort of honest 1 minute appraisal.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. No, I hope that's helpful to folk listening. Sean, anything to add to that?
I think I'm like Sylvia at the very sort of almost at the beginning of it, and my focus has primarily been applying for a research grant. I just submitted an ESRC new investigator scheme, but certainly the plan is that next year I'll do a little bit of teaching, and then it will slightly ratchet up as the years go on, and of course then the research will fall slightly. But yeah, I think just much the same as Greg. Really, it's pure research at the minute, and it will maintain that, but there will be sort of increments of teaching as I proceed.
Yeah, thanks. One of the questions that came up is a practical one about whether people should share this presentation externally. So this is an internal webinar, and we made it such so that we could talk about internal things that we might not want to share with the outside world if we choose. I don't think we have disclosed anything that we've been nervous about the outside world hearing today. So I feel comfortable, if others don't disagree immediately, that this external candidates would probably find this session useful, and we haven't said anything that we wouldn't want to be repeated outside. So if people want to share the link, I think that's just fine. There will be questions that we haven't addressed, and Susie, I think we agreed that we'd scan the questions afterwards, and if there are things we want to put on that might influence our FAQs, we'll certainly use those. But if you go away from this and you've got a question, particularly if it relates to yourself and a decision to make, and you want to get in touch individually by email, that's absolutely fine with us. We're delighted, Rebecca and Susie in particular, delighted to try to steer you and help you. There was a question in there about, could you use the NU Peer Review College to support you in preparing an application? The answer is, of course, you should use your nearest and dearest and supporters and mentors and everybody else to help you to shape your application, that's absolutely appropriate. This isn't a grant application as such, so I'm not sure that the RFDM team would want to be supporting it directly as a sort of NU peer review college in that formal process that supports grant applications. But obviously, informally, I think you should seek advice, as I'm sure all of the successful applicants on this call will have done in shaping propositions. So, folks, there's 5 minutes to go. Libby, did you want to make any kind of closing remarks or anything that you felt we haven't conveyed?
I don't know if you wanted to very briefly just mention the clinical call, which is at the end of the year to give us time to have a conversation with people. So these are for people that will be located both at Newcastle and then with their trust. So do you want a quick comment on that? And more information will be on the website about the clinical trial.
Yeah, I think that's as much as we can say at the minute, isn't it? We would love to hear from clinicians. There's a slightly more complicated process. It involves bringing NHS into the decision-making about appointment, and therefore the process runs in parallel. But if you're a clinician who fits with one of the early calls, do apply, and we will steer the clinicians through the process accordingly. If you're a non-clinician who wants to apply to what looks like a medical call, I think there was a question here. Of course, in FMS we have lots of, and indeed across the university, we have lots of people working as non-clinicians asking questions about clinical disease. Of course, that's part of the eligibility. So I firmly believe that we shouldn't have our diaries running on the hour every hour from one Zoom call to another. So I'm a little disappointed we've only got 4 minutes left, but nonetheless, we have 4 minutes left to allow you a chance to recover before your next appointment. And thanks very much for the enthusiasm and the attendance and the number of questions, which obviously indicates the level of interest. And thanks especially to our fellows who've taken time to come out and share their experience. We're all very proud in Nuact. We think it's great. And I can tell you that people around the country also think it's great, but we welcome your feedback and we want to shape it in the interests of the people who can best use it. Thanks a lot. We'll close there.